good morning, good afternoon, where you're logging in from. So today we are going to talk about data and data leading up to AI and Gen AI. And this is one of my favorite quotes. An idea can only go so far without execution. So the focus is how do we keep moving the needle on the execution front? All right, so this is no surprise what I'm showcasing here. It's the Rosetta Stone. The whole concept of how we can use data effectively within an organization is if we are able to unlock its value. And what we are going to talk today about is how do we unlock the value out of data? What does it mean to have a data-driven organization? And this is about having an organization where more than 85% of the decisions are taken based on data. And how do we build in the culture of data first organization? So it's not just about a technology transformation. We are talking about an organization change as well. And before I lead you down the path of what is the end thing in data today, let's look at what some of the analysts are talking about. And before that, let's look at what a strong data strategy means. Eventually, what happens is for us to have the right data ecosystem in place, it is not just about the technical ecosystem, it's not about the target operating model, it's about business strategy coming together with technology architecture and target operating model. So when we approach data strategy, we look at the domain in which the customer operates in, and we look at all the critical business processes in the domain, and we look at metrics in these critical processes which give us a direction of where the discussion is going or where the organization is moving. Then we put together a technical architecture which weaves in with the business strategy. And then eventually there is a target operating model with which we execute it. Going back to the previous statement that I spoke about, that execution is the key. And on across the spectrum, we will see some of these concepts like data ops, ML ops coming in, which is on the target operating model. We will talk about modernization to a cloud architecture when it comes to technology architecture side. And how do we bring in domain and business consulting into perspective, which is the business strategy side of the equation. So what does the market say? And this is interesting. See, we looked at a couple of marketing trends that were happening. And if you look at the hype cycle for data, just want to call your attention to a couple of interesting things in this hype cycle. So if you look at the peak of inflated expectations, that's where the generative AI is sitting today. And there are a lot of experimentation that is happening in that space. Today, honestly, 90 to 95% of my conversation with my customers revolves around generative AI. If I look to the left of generative AI, we see aspects like data monetization and other things coming to the fore. If I look to the right of generative AI, we're talking about metadata management. And this is about not just static metadata that we are talking about, this is about active metadata as well. Static metadata is definition of the data elements that are there in your organization. Dynamic metadata is about how often and how frequent these attributes are accessed. And in general, we are seeing this moving towards what we call as an ecosystem play in data. And some new architectures are coming forth. Architectures like data fabric, data mesh, we'll see more of that as we move along. And in essence, there are four trends and or hypotheses, as we call it, and investments are happening in that area. And as I said, most of my advisory is focused on these areas. One is data modernization at speed. It's not just about how to modernize the ecosystem, but how do I do it quickly and cheaply without sacrificing on the regular business processes. It's about how do I bring AI into regular data lifecycle. So this is about how do I use AI in data ingestion? How do I use AI in data modeling? The whole 9 yards as it pertains to the data's lifecycle. And end of the day, it's all about trusted data and trusted data management. This is about data governance, which is the key in any organization. To what extent can we automate or use AI in the governance process, and to what extent we can rely on trustworthy data, and intelligence at scale. And this is on the consumption side. Very often we overlook the consumption side of the equation, which is the most critical. Just wait for some of these elements to appear. So these are the hot topics in data and analytics as we see today. We spoke about modernization. Augmented data management is usage of AI and ML within the data lifecycle. We spoke about that. I touched upon data ops and ML ops. And the reason why it's critical is when it comes to data science, there is a statistic out there which says only 3% of the models that get developed actually see light at the end of the day. So these are the models which actually get into production. So it is critical to experiment, but it's also critical to move on and have some mechanisms like fail fast so that we can improve the quantum of models that actually get to see production. When it comes to data ops, we are talking about what we call as a end-to-end skill cluster that is required for organizations to maintain their data and analytics ecosystem. So we are talking about cross-selling, skilling. How do I have the necessary skills in the ecosystem, right from how do I source my data, how do I model my data, and all the way to how I consume data. So we are talking about business being a part of these teams, actively working on what we call as delivering outcomes rather than just the plumbing side of it or the consumption side of it in isolation. And this topic of industrializing AI and ML, going back to the previous speaker's session as well, a lot of work is around how we can remove the human element out of what we do. Build platforms or introduce platforms in the ecosystem that can accelerate adoption of AI and machine learning. How do I, in the area of data governance, how do I bring in more automation? How do I bring in more rigor to the data governance processes? Today, we are talking about data as a product, data sets which are available for ready consumption. So what works for which customers? And the biggest issue that we see in this field is you have a plethora of technologies out there and a plethora of architectures to choose from. So you need an expert to demystify the equation for you. It's not one size that fits all, but you got to go for the best fit. Then we have aspects of how do we introduce self-service in data and BI. And we feel that there are disruptors right around the corner. One such disruptor is the knowledge graphs. So, how do we look at data via the lens of graphs? So, rather than looking at it as parent-child relationships between data, we look at it as subject, object, and predicate. And by this way, it means we are solving one of the largest conundrums that we have had in the data space. And that's the question of, have I looked at all the data sets that I'm supposed to look at for me to take a decision? So this is what we continue to hear from our customers. And there are two numbers that I want to draw your attention to, 85 and 55. 85% of the spend is still going to what we call as plumbing. And in this industry, some of you on the call who are familiar with it would know that we move from enterprise data warehouses to enterprise data lakes to lake houses, and all these lake houses on the cloud, and now to data mesh. We have been consistently investing on what we call the plumbing. But consumption, and which is going back to the data-driven decision making, how many decisions are taken? How many tactical and operational decisions are taken on the basis of data? That's only 10 to 15% of the spend. That's one critical data fact for us to have our fingers on. The second is this number 55%. So we did a primary research with Forrester, and we surveyed around 300 plus companies, and we asked them the question, are you happy with your modernization journey? Are you getting the right ROI for the investments that you've made in the data and analytics space? A resounding 55% said they were not happy with it. And this goes back to the earlier point that I made around data strategy and how that needs to be solidified for us to start reaping benefits out of the ecosystem that we are operating in. And these discussions then roll on to the data governance aspect of it. the adoption, how do we reduce the tech debt, and how do we bring seamless operations in the ecosystem. Now, this is for the next 6 months to 1 year. I can guarantee you that there's going to be one term that you're going to be challenged with. And I'll come to the term subsequently, but a little bit of history. Over the last 2, 3 years, we've been seeing all domains, banking, telcos, healthcare, becoming what we call as technology companies. In the next 6 months to 1 year, technology companies are going to be called data companies or data driven companies. And it essentially means that we are going to view the entire organization through the prism of data. And the question that I'm asking you now is, are we prepared for that? And what does that mean? And this is where we bring in this concept of the global data organization, where you have data as the fundamental foundation for what's happening. And it's an ecosystem and a transformation where you move not just for insights, but we're talking about insights to decisioning. It's not about technology platforms, but it's about an ecosystem play. And it's interesting when we say ecosystem, and I've been repeatedly challenged by my customers on why do I have to do this? When I modernize, why should I move to the cloud and so on and so forth? And the answer is simply if you want to participate in the ecosystem, you got to be at the forefront of technology that is being used in the ecosystem and moving from data literacy to fluency. And that's a very strong term that I'm using here, which encapsulates aspects of observability and trustworthiness that we see in the data. So, as an organization, close to around 15 to 20% of our revenues come from data. And we work across three major domains, banking, financial services, insurance, healthcare, and telcos. We have our footprint in other domains as well, but these are the three major areas where we place the focus on. And I want to talk about a couple of very successful case studies that Virtusa had been a part of and link it back to some of the messages that I've been sending across in terms of what are the themes, what are customers looking for today, and what we need to do in order to stay healthy in this data ecosystem. One is movement away from on-prem. And typically, we had followed this industry trend of a lot of organizations moving to Hadoop-based ecosystems. Now it's time for moving those Hadoop-based data ecosystems, which are predominantly on the prem to cloud. And we have done multiple projects of that nature. Then there is this trend of what we would call as a hybrid cloud. So it's just not about putting all your bets in one hyperscaler. It's a question of distributing your bets across hyperscalers so that you're not held to ransom at any point in time. So it's a question of how do I move from an AWS-based Redshift ecosystem where I do all my analytics processing, but I still do my regular transaction processing in an Azure-based ecosystem or what have you. And by doing some of these, we have been able to bring about a significant difference in implementing DNA as a service, decrease in time spent as high as 60%, and so on and so forth. When it comes to work that we have done for telcos, I spoke about this concept of data mesh, data products. How do we start viewing data as a product? And once data is treated as a product, how can these data sets be used for modernization and monetization and other such incentives? And one of the aspects that you would have noticed is I deliberately stayed away from generative AI, but there are a lot of activities that we are doing in generative AI as well. In terms of one, being able to generate synthetic data with which I can train my models. So we have done it for large banks in chatbot interactions, where we have used synthetic data to train what we call as intent of a customer or training the intent for a specific model. We have also worked or utilized GenAI in instances where we point the chat interface to, let's say, assets within an enterprise ecosystem, and to enable a simple query-based interface that we have to the assets in the ecosystem. And I'm also talking about a case here where we had built an omni-channel conversational AI and a cognitive search for a multinational investment bank. And this is about having that chatbot interface, having pertinent information. And when I say pertinent information, think of it as a, let's say, a credit card transaction that I had where there is a reject. So I go online, and the first question that comes up in the chatbot is, are you calling us, or are you reaching out to us to inquire about the transaction that failed? So this is about having pertinent augmented AI in your chatbot conversations and enriching those conversations using NLP techniques so that we are able to sustain the conversation between a human and a bot to as high as 7 to 8 minutes. And then what this results in is a phenomenal decrease in the cost per transaction, a decrease of, let's say, $14 per transaction to as low as 33 cents per transaction. This is what we've been able to achieve by effectively harnessing the power of machine learning and Gen AI. So I'd like to end the discussion by telling you that, look, Gen AI, it's still some way off. We've been experimenting with it in various facets. Machine learning, which is regular deep learning, it has reached a phase where it can be commercialized quickly, and we have had some phenomenal successes with that. And it's also about contributing to the ecosystem as a whole, where organizations like Virtusa are working very closely with the hyperscalers in looking at what is out there in the industry for us. So with this, I will end my spiel and hand it back to you, Ron.